Welcome, I'm Di Smith. This video is the second of Australia's fees and fines, the first being electricity. In this video, we'll be looking at Australia's councils, otherwise known as local governments. It states in Wikipedia that the local governing body is generally referred to as councils, of which there are 547 in the whole of Australia. I'm not sure if there includes shires or cities, as there seems to be a distinction between them, but it appears they have been permitted to govern anything from 1.5 kilometres square. That's right, 1.5 kilometres square to 380,000 kilometres square, which is ludicrous. And in 2017, there was a big uproar. The federal government wanted to close and unite some of them. To me, when I heard this, I was elated because we are an over-governed country, and to me, councils are little Hitlers. Why I say this is because in the 80s and 90s, I ran a local newspaper and found zones that were supposed to never change be changed by a local member at a whim and in a moment's notice. Protected lands, agricultural lands, would have their zoning changed overnight without the state conciliation, and this is an ongoing event in government today. I've also been appalled that business people, who are often on councils, are allowed to sit in on confidential meetings, and often there are lawyers, real estate people, business people who are councillors who make these decisions. And it's only just come to light with the President of America having to relinquish all his holdings in business to become a president because they cannot have other interests that can jeopardise different hearings and things they have to decide on. Councils have even become more structured when in the 90s they put legislation forward for them to be the third tier of government. How and when a constitution change could come about so swiftly, I could say I have no idea. And again, there was no referendum to change our constitution to include a third tier of government. But in looking at Australia's chart, it will be explained. But first, truth we need to understand, and that is by the past. And whilst, again, through Wikipedia, there is no mention of councils being an administrative body in the Constitution of Australia, formed in the 70s and 80s, I believe the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution 1901 showed there was no mention of councils at all. The only revenue-raising body was a state government. Whilst two referendums were held in the 70s and 80s to do with councils, both were unsuccessful. Individual state governments have included them in their own constitution. So in a way, they've gone around the issue of constitutions and local governments not needing a referendum. To me, this is ironic and only causes hardship to the public in allowing other governments without prior constitutional rights to claim fines and fees. It appears that when a referendum does not succeed in changing the government, individual states will just make their own constitution. To me, it will only separate a country, eventually allowing them to be independent. I've felt the differences every time I travel through one of the Australian states. For me, it only feels slight, for there is the same flora, which are trees and plants. Whilst I noticed a change, and I'm not sure how, whether it's temperature or the people, But I do know that if I'm near a border, it feels like people have dual citizenship. And it goes without saying, the more governments there is, the more fines and fees we have. And as mentioned, hardship on the local community. When it wouldn't necessarily mean local communities, but I will explain this in the chart. This fines and fees in another chart could come about from a total different area of maybe their expertise or where their Pluto is. And this is what it shows in our chart. Our Pluto revenue raising areas, Pluto is the ruler of that, is in Gemini. But I will go into that in a moment. When we look at Australia's natal chart taken at the time of the formation of government on the 1st of January 1901, the first thing you notice is the chart. In the chart are the red lines. But I want you to notice the degrees, because there wouldn't be an aspect without them. And here you'll see the planet Pluto in red at the bottom, opposite the planet Uranus at the top in mauve. I've mentioned in my prior video that Pluto rules corruption, but only when there are planets opposite or squaring it. And the chart house and planet shows where. But this is only when the time and date are correct. This is why some astrologers would not like to do a chart, or say they can't give you a full chart if you haven't got the correct time, because it places planets in a particular house. And the house is seen in a chart where it goes in an anti-clockwise motion from 1 to 12 in the inner circle, or just out of the inner circle. Generally, this aspect would show revolutionary ideas. That's the one where Pluto is opposite to Uranus, and Uranus is the area of revolutionary ideas, or give about new ideas. Now, this is being blocked by the community. As I said, there's referendums have not been passed. And one might say that why they haven't been passed is because you can see in the chart Pluto will cause blockages. It's an abrupt sign. It's a very subtle sign as well. And it is the ruler of Scorpio. But if the Scorpio person hasn't got Pluto in their sign, it would mean that they do not have the same fixed characteristics. And this is why we cannot look at a person and think that they will have the same characteristics as a zodiac sign says. There's a great deal more to a person than their zodiac. In fact, a zodiac only shows the physical self, where the sun is. The Mercury generally is around their physical self, the sun, by 28 degrees, and that the Mercury shows how they think. But I'm getting off the track. You need to know these little bits and pieces to understand a chart, understand yourself, understand a person, in this case, understand a country. With the aspect Uranus, we find, as I said, mentions revolutionary ideas which are being blocked by the local community. No referendum's been passed. How are they getting around it? Well, after this blockage, we can see that the legal structure has found a way to get around them. And I state the legal structure because whilst Gemini in the 3rd house are rulers of the community, the 9th house and Sagittarius are the rulers of philosophy, laws, which become the legal structure. But I should also say politicians. Now, you'll see I've brought in new planets in the outer ring, and they are the progressed planets. These add to our natal chart, and it shows how the planets have moved on and the areas that we have focused on as time progresses. But I'm still going to refer to the natal planets. Unfortunately, in one documentary, there isn't enough time to go through the progress planets, whilst I will be referring to them. What we see after Uranus in the 9th house, opposite to Pluto, as mentioned earlier, is Jupiter. Jupiter is now 25 degrees 59 minutes. Now, this is in the natal chart, so I was wrong in saying now. I'm talking about when the country was formed. But now we see the planet that rules Sagittarius and Jupiter's 9th house in its native constellation and house. This causes an expansion in the areas it rules. As mentioned, philosophy and laws and lawyers. It causes our legal system to be a dumping ground to acts brought in from overseas because of the intensity of these planets, constellation, and house all being together at the time of creation of our nation. Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius, and this is why I say that there is a dumping ground. But it has changed with Jupiter moving into Capricorn. Now, the one thing I'd like to say, and which I find disturbing because I rather like Sagittarian people, is that their characteristic, and Jupiter ruler of Sagittarius, is that they don't like to be apologetic at what they do. They prefer to sweep the mistakes under the carpet, and this is what I find with politicians, not confronting issues. Or they prefer to wave it away as some menial error. But the laws have a determining effect on the communities of the country. Laws would probably be a number one focal point of discussion in Australia, and one of the great confusions, which is not necessarily focused on. But there was an old cliche that was common in polite society, and that was not to talk about sex, religion, or politics. As such, politics were left to the men. Now, I've brought in the fact that the laws are confusing and that it's because of the planet Neptune, which rules spiritual ideas and thoughts when opposed brings about confusion. And history tells us this is what was seen with Captain Cook first tried to converse with the native Aborigine. In fact, one Aborigine hearsay was when the first Aborigine saw Captain Cook looking through his telescope, asked why was he using his boomerang for his eye. Today, the legal system would cause mental drain out, especially to laws and lawyers, I should say. Lawyers looking at laws, because if we look at the outer ring in the 10th house, we see Jupiter now has moved to the 6th degree separation of Saturn in the 10th house, with Jupiter in Capricorn, meaning a desire to have things workable and practical. But going back 20 years, I found it was far from that for me. In relating to confusion, I found this when looking at a property taken over illegally by Insolvency Trustee Service of my mother's when they put a caveat over it. ITSA's manager could see no wrong in what they did, yet legal text showed that ITSA couldn't put a caveat over a house when a caveat could only cover land and when the bankrupt owned only a quarter share of it. The concern of my mother disturbed me greatly, but what happened after that was more disturbing, which led me to ask the Federal Police to look into it. My mother's prescription of cortisone was cancelled, which controlled her liver problems caused by contracting hepatitis from where she worked. I asked the Federal Police to look into how many other people who were creditors, taken as debtors, had their prescription stopped, leading to their death. It would be very convenient for ITSA. I don't know whether it was a coincidence or not that I found ITSA on the level below the medical board in Canberra. It took a long time for me to understand what the planets meant and how it affected us, which had to be proven, and not once but repeatedly. I had a somewhat naive belief that bringing facts to the government would bring about change and a better system. But change and understanding and having the ability to do what is right takes courage, and politicians don't last long when there are radical changes. And unfortunately, because of the confusion that is in place, which greatly has to do with communications, politicians appear to lack the know-how to confront issues head-on. When I realised there were so many issues to do with conflicting laws, issues I know I had to work my way around it, I decided to look on the internet the highest profession affected by mental illness, which turned out to be lawyers. Recent searches included counsellors. It caused me to become quite sympathetic to them, but it also explains why courts are so glib. I've attended several court hearings and not once was the evidence read that was given to a judge. So whether he actually saw it would be debatable, especially where there are often more than 10 pages. According to this chart, they'd find reading too tiresome. Confusion is one of the key elements to our laws that are letting us down, which have permitted Australia to have multiple governments. Jupiter and Sagittarius in the ninth house causes communications to take on a hopeful and optimistic nature, and when a person is being courteous, their obvious lack of interest becomes understated. Councils are ruled by Mercury, which is next to Jupiter, and again opposite Neptune. This is in the natal chart. Neptune is the ruler of sleep and dreams, the subconscious and unconscious mind. In the negative, it can rule shipwrecks, which could cause missing acts back in those days. When Mercury rules the consciousness, the written word, professionally it rules clerks and menial tasks, which can be repetitive and boring. It's probably why when I had an audit done on my property rates, the auditor replied, there was $460 that were not able to be audited out of $1,000 paid. When I looked up the Act, I found general rate was a heading. I'm still wondering about street lights, which are another cost on the ratepayer when we pay separately for electricity. If councils paid back all the monies owed to ratepayers, they'd be broke. So it's easier to have the ratepayers broke. Now, I'm going to look quickly over the fines and fees of councils and how they claim their revenue, which were once free. A council that was under state government and to maintain the community. Before I go on, I'd like to state that this is no way complete. There are many more fines and fees that I will have not mentioned that you will find if you would like to go into it further. Now, I've started out with simple things. Parking costs in the CBD. We have metered costs there, which can be $2 a half hour. There are pensioner rebates, but that doesn't apply to parking costs. Aquatic and leisure resorts are run by council. These are facilities, and there are fees for membership, personal trainers, group trainers, pool entry, separate to health and fitness centres. There are casual adult payments, concessions, seasonal passes, adult passes, and they can come in the form of 6 months or a year. And there are also soccer and netball memberships and insurances. There are car parking fees at aquatic centres in some cases. There are 1 to 3 hour limits, so there are fines for anything over there. There are all-day rates. There are conference rooms rates. There's installation and maintaining and dismantling of banners if you have a festival going in a community. There are fines for putting up banners up without permission. Council libraries, they have memberships and fees required for annual membership. There are residents have no charge, but people outside a city area are fined or there is a fee. There is non-residents with seniors cards and benefits. There are non-residential children up to 18 years a fee. There are non-resident homeless, zero and no cost for those. Quarterly memberships, non-residents and permanent New South Wales address fee. There are reservations and loans fees. These are just in the library. There are books and magazines and interloan fees, and fast tracking is an additional fee. There are library loans and interlibrary loans, charging libraries, minimum fee varying depending on rate charged by other libraries. There are requests of purchase fees. Lost items per item is that there is a fee and a replacement fee in full. There are costs for lost books, lost periodicals, overdue items that can be quite considerably over time, and there's a maximum fee of $10 per item. There's photocopying fees. There are noise fees. Now we're getting into the area of communities itself. There are building permits fees, which can be in the hundreds. There are lodging plans for approval fees. There are rates for lease of land. No one owns land in Australia. Cost for the street lights, water fees, removal of garbage fee, lopping tree fee, fines for building on a sidewalk, fines for if a tree falls from your property onto a sidewalk. There are fines for building without permission. There are fines for building on other people's property. There are fines for putting a fence on another person's property. Now, they may also request you to pull down the fence or pull down the shed or pull down whatever you may have built. Now, as for animals, there are animal registration fees and fines. If there's an animal not registered, you have to pay for them. You have to pay to have a chip put in. You'll get fined for having the dog or animal out on the street. And police and councils for allowing them out in the street without a leash and being unaccompanied. Now, if you want to know more about what council fees and fines are, I suggest you call them up and your local council and inquire. Now, I'm finishing here, and this is just one section of our fines and fees list in Australia. We'll do more in other videos. Thank you for listening.